Hello,
Hello.
everyone. Welcome to another live show of the history of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky is what we're going to be discussing today. And today we're going to be discussing chapters 16 through 20 and maybe a
Yeah.
little bit earlier as well, because I think we have one question that's from like chapter 15. So if you're a little behind, don't worry. um, Tony is on schedule. I think he's the only one, though.
Yeah.
Welcome, Urza.
I I have slightly more control of my time than you probably do, to be fair.
I think I just can't seem to bang out reading very quickly. Like most of my friends can just read more quantity than I can, but
I
it is what it is.
yeah. I've got 10 books on the go at the moment.
Yeah. See, I might do that, but they're mostly going to be like half of them are going to be audiobooks and stuff like that.
Yeah. They're all
Hey, Mimi's here.
I've rejoined the library, my local library, so I went a bit mad when I went
Good
down to
for
the
you.
library.
Yeah, that'll help you save some money.
So I have a pile of books to read, some of which are connected to this book.
Oh, yes. Okay, maybe we should just start off the live show then talking about what, because you're doing a lot of side research, so it's always
Yeah.
interesting here. So, what else have you been reading alongside it?
Well, the thing that I have got the most out of so far is this.
Mm-hmm.
I've only read that much of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually the first part. I've read part one basically, and that's mainly contextualizing things up, like Russian society, up to 1917 basically. So it's all the
Oh,
pre.
helpful.
So it's got a section on the monarchy. It's got a section on the peasantry. It's got stuff on the church. It's got stuff on
Mm-hmm.
um, all the different sort of left wing anti-government org things as they come together over time and how they change. And then the last bit of part one was how Marxism got into Russia, and there's a chunk about Lenin, and how the Bolsheviks came about and how the split with the Mensheviks happened. And
That'd be so
it's
helpful.
yeah, it is really helpful actually. The section on the peasantry really fills out the section on peasantry in Trotsky's book, because there's a lot more information in there about how it worked and why. It's actually very good, basically, on showing how the Tsar himself basically helped create all the perfect opportunities for a revolution.
He
Basically,
did. He prepared Russia perfectly,
yeah,
accidentally.
accidentally, and it's very well written. I mean, it's a big book. It's going to take a while to get through. Probably about the same time as it will take me to read the Trotsky book.
Yeah, I
So
know. We're gonna take like it's at this rate. We're gonna take like 9 months to read the Trotsky book.
yeah,
Uh,
I think it takes as long as it takes.
yeah, as long as everybody. I announced it when we announced it. I was like, it's gonna be a long and slow readathon, but it's literally like almost twice the length than I was originally planning. So
Well,
that's fine.
I read quite fast,
Mm-hmm.
but I am trying to cut that habit back a bit because I feel sometimes I don't read deep enough.
So Ursula said you need to join the cult of 3x audio, which made me laugh. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't. Go on,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say the thing with audio is it won't really necessarily help you read deeper, but it would help you finish some stuff if you're in the middle of 10 things.
Well, I've created an Excel spreadsheet with breaking down each book I've got by chapter and number of pages in
Wow,
each chapter to
that's
try
so
and work
cool.
out and put a date in for, like, to read one chapter a day of everything. I
Mhm.
can't do that obviously because it tots up to. Actually, it doesn't tot up to that many pages, but it's probably tot. But I try and get as much of it. So, like, one of the things is a short story collection. So I'm reading one of those a day.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's cool.
Other things I'm just reading the chapters of, and if I ever, it's a chapter or an hour depending on what comes first, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, that's not true. If it's sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say that's a way to keep on track. That's a really I basically for the very beginning of this read along, every spare minute I was spending reading the history of the Russian Revolution. I still only got 7 out of the 10 chapters, 7.5 of the 10 chapters read. So I'm getting about 5 to 6 read now, and I have a little more breathing room. So
yeah,
it's working out for me. Oh yes. So how is the Eastern Front going?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a very military history, but that's kind of what I needed to cover.
Yes. Okay. We have a question about that. So maybe that will help you answer that question as well. So why don't we do that question in a minute? I just want to answer some of the comments here. So Mimi, this is such a great question. Mimi asked, why is the bourgeoisie always called petty? So I had to look this up because I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah.
So this is what I found, that petty bourgeoisie is like, it's supposed to be petite bourgeoisie. So you know how people always call, I don't know how you pronounce them, but there's a dessert, or like a French dessert that people call petit fours.
Yeah.
That's how I'm remembering it. So it equals petite bourgeoisie, which is the lower middle class. And I have to look up the class titles like over and over again because they just do not stick very well in my head. Like the difference between peasantry, bourgeoisie, and petty bourgeoisie. Yeah, proletarians. Yeah, that's the other one. Yeah, thank you. Is proletarians the same as? No, one of them is workers. One of them is because there's peasantry owned land, right? Or no?
The proletariat are the urban
class.
Industrial working class.
Okay.
The peasantry are the agricultural working class.
Oh, okay, so they don't own any land either.
They do actually at this point. That's one of the things that the Orlando Figes. I constantly doubt my ability to pronounce his surname, but Orlando Figes, I'm going to call him. That does a very good job of talking about how the land, because originally all the land was fundamentally owned by the aristocracy, and there were small plots owned by workers. Everybody was a serf, basically. So they worked they were slaves fundamentally. I mean, not quite slaves, but they were. But when the serfdom system was changed, peasants were allowed to buy land, and it's normally bought on a family basis, and then the family works their land. This is how I'm remembering it, so I am perfectly prepared to be corrected by people that know better.
Me too, always.
Yeah, and that led to sort of things like there are some peasants in inverted commas that own larger plots of land or more land, or sublet it or hire other peasants to do the work on the land. That I think they're the ones that become known as kulaks, and get a kicking as a result later on. Because one of the things that Orlando Figes points out in his book is that they tried to apply capitalism. They tried to apply Marxism to the peasantry, as in how the structure works, and say that capitalism had and it hasn't, and it's a bad start to what's about to happen. Is that they try and apply Marxist thinking to how the peasants operate, yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating. There's so many interesting things that I didn't know about how Russia worked at that point. About how the villages were like built around. Each village had its own head, group of people, older people that would meet together and decide on things. It was the whole structure is quite interesting. And it helps you understand, and quite some of the bad things about that structure, why people were leaving it, and going to the cities, which was creating other problems. So it's a good.
I need to read that. I've had that recommended to me as well, even from you and from other people, Orlando Fijas. So I really need.
Yeah, I think it's what I've read so far. I mean, I've read Natasha's Dance, which didn't you read Natasha's Dance?
I bought it because of you, but yeah,
which is also great. On actually, one of the things he's good at as well is he talks about the influence of literature on revolutionaries and including Lenin.
Oh, we have a. Who was you were talking about? Who in Lenin?
Well, what literature had an effect on Lenin, and why actually there's a book called "What's to Be Done."
Oh yeah, no. I've heard of that one because it was oh shoot, Fathers and Sons was a response, wasn't? Or no, what is to be done? Is that? Oh wait, never mind. Let me see.
I think it's Chernyshevsky.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, that had apparently had a massive influence on revolutionaries all over Russia, and it really had an impact on Lenin. And because the main character in it is like a key revolutionary in the way he's like a Puritan revolutionary that kind of Lenin saw as like the ideal. There's a quote. I wish I got I've got so many notes from the Fiji's book.
I know, yeah. I'm like word searching through my notes and stuff right now. What is to be done? It was either Notes from the Underground or Fathers and Sons was written as a response to that. It might have been both, both of them might have. But yeah, that was a big one because it was like I just don't remember. I need to do that video for what Notes of the Underground because that'll refresh my memory on everything. But we have a question as well about Stalin versus Lenin versus Trotsky as well. So we're going to be talking about this.
Yeah, Stalin.
Yeah, because this is the impression that I had going into it because I was just coming off of Animal Farm. Stalin ruined everything.
I think it probably would have been ruined anyway. But I think Stalin ruined it
even more.
Even more than it probably would. Yeah. It's hard to be nice about. It's hard to say anything good about Stalin.
Yeah. Mom's advice of don't say anything if you can't say anything nice. That it just doesn't apply to Stalin.
Apparently, when he was young, he wrote some very good poetry when he was in the when he was training to be a monk. And apparently, it is actually apparently quite good poetry.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
In another life, he would have been a poet instead.
Well, they always say that he got worse. He was pretty bad anyway, but he got worse after his first wife committed suicide.
Oh yeah.
And that made him even less. And she committed suicide basically because Stalin didn't seem to give a toss about the famine in Ukraine, and she took that sort of as a personal thing and shot herself. And after that, I think he never really recovered, and so became even more of a evil, paranoid.
Yeah. Was she Russian or was she like from Ukraine?
I can't remember actually. I think she might have been from Ukraine, but
that's interesting. Now I'm gonna.
But yeah, you can't. I mean, I think if you've made your way up to the highest level by being devious and murderous, then you are probably going to think somebody else is behind you thinking the same thing, and it's going to make you paranoid by default, basically, because you're going to think I did this, so somebody else might do it to me.
Right. Is it paranoia? Is that how you would characterize him in general?
Well, I don't know if paranoia is fair. If people are out to get you, then
Then you're not paranoid.
paranoid.
It's true.
But there is an element of I don't know. I think it's very hard to say because I never. Yeah, I think Stalin was very good at some things in terms of like how to managing the party, putting people in his debt, and then playing them all off each other to get so that eventually he had all the power, and then making everybody afraid of him and being ruthless to the point of horror. But when you compare him to Hitler, say he probably killed more people than Hitler.
That is wild.
Direct, like in terms of, it's hard to say really because it's how you work out the statistics for the deaths in World War II. But he was never Hitler. Hitler used to play his people off against each other, which meant that the Nazi Germany was a completely disorganized mess, which was probably good for everybody else in the world, but probably not. Whereas although Stalin did an element of that, when it came down to the crunch, i.e. World War II, he did back off and say, look, you know more about this than I do, so I'm going to let my generals I might poke them occasionally, but I'm going to let them get on with it. Whereas Hitler was like, I know more about this than my generals do. I'm going to tell them what to do and make them do stupid things. Which is quite interesting. Sorry, I'm doing it again. I'm doing all the talking again.
No, it's okay. I'm a little slow on the uptake today because I think I'm fighting off a sinus infection. So if I'm slow on the uptake, that's why. So I might go a little bit on tangents or whatever. Okay, so I didn't see this comment, but Mimi was the one who brought this up. So thank you, Mimi. I did not know this. Okay. And Kelly's here. Hello, Kelly. She says she finally finished The Brothers Karamazov. I know. Once you experience the best of Dostoevsky, it kind of changes you as a person. Okay. So Mimi says she loves the last sentence in chapter 17 about a leader is not accidentally created in reference to Lenin. Interesting.
Well, the one thing I didn't know about Lenin is that he was basically an aristocrat.
Oh, sorry, my phone. I'm looking at
the son of a minor aristocrat, but an aristocrat.
Okay. Interesting, and because he shows up swinging for the working class and the soldiers. You know, he is like not on the side of the aristocrats. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a very Feige's in his book makes some interesting points about how many revolutionaries are from aristocratic backgrounds, and how part of their motivation is not so much guilt, but a kind of
they feel responsibility or something.
Yeah,
because the one who wrote War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy, he felt the same way. You know, he tried to give away all of his riches and
but they often end up going down the route of we want to help the peasantry and the working classes. We're going to do it our way, and if they don't like it, then we're just going to make them do it anyway. Rather than democracy, there seems to be a tendency towards aristocracy by a different name, basically.
Right. I know.
Because the Bolsheviks basically effectively replaced the aristocracy of money and family history with the aristocracy
it was like
of power.
Even some of the same people were still in charge. Like they were just talking about that in in chapter 19. It was talking about how after the revolution, all the same leaders were still in place in the army. They were expecting all the soldiers to still work under the same leadership, and basically that. And what we've been establishing for it feels like a lot of chapters now. It feels like 10 chapters. He's been establishing the fact that the workers took the power and then gave it back to the same people who had it before. But slowly, people are being weeded out. Milyukov finally has been weeded out, so it's slowly changing.
Well, when you read about how Russian soldiers were treated in the Russian army, the Russian military in general, it does. No you're surprised they didn't shoot all their officers
before
there
then.
And then, basically.
Okay, this might. Okay, I'm gonna. I found that quote, but it's a little too long, which is probably why Mimi didn't share it all. But I'm just gonna continue after her quote. So, a leader is not accidentally created. Oh,
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Hang on. How long do I do my burrito?
Sorry.
You're right.
Okay. No, it's still too long. Well, I'll just read it. Leaders are not accidentally created. They are gradually chosen out and trained up in the course of decades, that they cannot be capriciously replaced, that their mechanical exclusion from the struggle gives the party a living wound, and in many cases may paralyze it for a long period. And it's actually at the end of 16.
Well, there's a quote from Maxim Gorky in 1917 that says, Lenin is a leader, in inverted commas, and a Russian nobleman, not without certain psychological traits of this extinct class, and therefore he considers himself justified in performing with the Russian people a cruel experiment which is doomed to failure.
Wow. So Maxim Gorky, isn't he the one who started off being like a revolutionary and then like changed his mind later?
Well, I think he's always a revolutionary of sorts, but he doesn't agree with Lenin. I think they let him. I think even I can't remember when he dies, because I think even Stalin left him alone because he was so popular and. He might have gone into exile. I can't remember. I'll need to check. But they do. I don't think they do, any harm comes to him.
He doesn't get assassinated like so many.
No, but I think because he was so popular, at that point.
Is Gorky Park about Maxim Gorky? I don't even know.
Think it.
No, it isn't. I've never seen Gorky Park, so I don't know.
So. I think Gorky Park is named after Gorky. I think.
Oh, I don't even know where that is. Okay, I don't really know.
But yeah, it's one of my knowledge of Russian literature, as in fiction, is very poor.
I missed this until just now. That's funny. Yeah, well, maybe now you. Well, I do periodically do Russian read-alongs, but you did One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich with us, and maybe during Red September we might. I know that Tiffany's going to be reading We, so that's one. But anyways,
yeah, I read that. I went through a phase of reading like We 1984. Old dystopian novels.
Yeah, I'm excited. I like dystopian fiction, like all of it. I find it fascinating, like, and utopian, like Thomas More, and I find that stuff fascinating. Okay, so it looks like let's see. Oh yes, the concept of the Soviet is fascinating. Yeah. I didn't know what he was talking about at first. So that's really interesting that Soviets, they were like, I'm still a little bit, so the Duma is the Duma kind of similar except it's government support? Like, is that the difference?
Yeah, the Duma is parliament effectively. So it's the official.
Okay. So the Soviet is more like community. It's like a community.
They're workers and soldiers councils.
Okay.
I think you get elected to them by your own workmates and fellow soldiers. And
yeah, it seems like the people in charge of the Soviets can change very quickly, because they were talking about how he keeps kind of tallying up how quickly the Bolsheviks gained power after they were no longer banned, and he's sort of tallying up, like in chapter 19 he talks about now like a third of them are, you know, Bolsheviks, you know, whatever. So
well, yeah, that third, I think, the thing he says that I thought was interesting in that quote was that he says a third of them are Bolsheviks and they are the most active. And I think that's the key thing, is that they were active. There was a stat, it was in the Feige's book that I want to dig out, because it's the number of people that are actually when they had their 1917, when the Bolsheviks had their 1917 conference, for want of a better word, it's not quite the right word. They had it has the numbers for the membership, and when you actually realize how small the membership of the Bolshevik Party was, it is actually incredible that they managed to take control of everything. I'm just trying to find the stat. It's just going to annoy me now. I'm probably looking right at it in my notes.
Yes, you can look around for it, and I'll check out the chat again. Yeah, 1984 is really good. I know, the horse. I was just thinking about this today. The horse in Animal Farm. That was so sad. Trying to get out. It's like being chosen as class rep in school. Okay. So why don't we discuss some of our questions? But if you find the stat, please share.
It's in here somewhere. I'm sure I put it in my notes.
Okay. So what are the differences? This is something that I went into this work wanting to understand the differences between Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky. So far we've gotten a little bit about Stalin in one chapter, and maybe that's all we need to know for the moment. I'm sure later on we're going to be learning about Stalin, but Lenin, we're spending quite a lot of time, I feel like, with him so far. So, and if they were in a room together, what would they argue about? So their argument, I feel like, would depend on the month, because it seems like the argument in the so let's see, is Stalin.
Well, I think Stalin is initially wanting to go down the classic Marxist route, which is he's saying his view is that they need to have the bourgeois revolution before they can have the working class, the proletarian revolution. And he's sticking to, let's call that the conservative with a small c version of.
Yes, it called it the right, which I'm like,
yeah,
the right and left confuses me, because it's different, obviously, than American, which is different from Britain. It's different from Korea. Like,
yeah,
left and right is different everywhere. It seems like.
Yeah. Whereas Lenin comes in basically saying we don't need to worry about the let's just get control, stop the war, get control, and push the revolution through. Because if we don't, then a counter-revolution is coming, fundamentally.
Which he was right about.
Yeah. And Trotsky, I don't really know at this point, because Stalin and Trotsky have serious arguments later on about Trotsky kind of believes in a what's the word? A permanent revolution. Basically, Trotsky thinks you have to keep up with the revolution, and you need to push your revolution out into the world, because and the way I've kind of always understood this is it's self-preservation. Really, it's just like if everywhere has revolutions, it's easier for you to stay safe in the Soviet Union because there are less enemies for you to deal with.
Okay.
So if the ideal would have been if the German Revolution that happened at the end of World War One had succeeded, there would have been the Soviet Union and Germany as revolution. There were other revolutions going on all over Europe post, safety numbers basically. Whereas Stalin came up as his alternative to that was like socialism in one country, which is the best way to be strong is to build up your industry, build up your power in your own country. Then you are safe and in control. They argue there was other things they argue about, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it seemed like in February they were arguing about like who should. So part of this argument is taking part within the Bolshevik Party because Stalin and Lenin were both Bolsheviks, whereas Trotsky wasn't, right? He's a Menshevik.
Yeah, Stalin was always a Bolshevik once he committed. Trotsky, even at this point in the book, if you read because he actually starts quoting himself in the third person or referring to himself in the third person.
He does.
I think Trotsky at this point is still not a Bolshevik.
Interesting.
Officially, anyway, I think he's there's that difference between Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky in that Trotsky was more Menshevik inclined than Stalin and Lenin. But I think they all. It's more. I think that the argument is more about. It's more about how strictly Marxist you want to be, and also it's more about tactic. It's more about. I mean, the one thing that comes across from the book so far is that the people were still ahead of even the Bolsheviks, even Lenin. At this point, they were more like they were, and I think Lenin has started to realise that if the Bolsheviks don't take control, then there is no, then somebody else will, because the momentum is towards more of a revolution, or so the next step is either a revolution led by somebody or a counter-revolution, and you're in that situation. So you have to grab the reins of power while you've got the chance.
So because Lenin, he was really like, that's what needs to happen. Whereas it seems like Stalin was willing to compromise a bit, and he was okay with the liberal bourgeoisie compromising with them. It seemed like,
and I think because he thought, I think from reading what Trotsky says, which how true it is about.
I know that's another thing. It's like,
because he does make a subtle job of painting Stalin out to be.
He calls him politically characterless. That he says, so he has no theoretical viewpoint and very Russian. Like he had no knowledge of foreign languages, whereas other Marxists had like more experience outside of Russia, I guess you would say, because they were exiled as well. And says he was distinguished among the practicals for energy, persistence, and inventiveness in the matter of moves behind the scenes. But then he also basically calls him stupid a lot, like just not too bright. Like, so.
Well, I think Trotsky is always, I think reading between the lines, Trotsky is always annoyed that he got outmaneuvered by Stalin.
Yeah, you can sense his antagonism.
But you get the impression that Stalin was much more practical than Trotsky. And that Trotsky was much more theoretical and airy-fairy. And that Stalin realised that practicalities like administration, control of offices, control of structures was what was important, not theory.
Yes. And that's probably why he was able to outmaneuver him.
Yeah, and he was very good at building alliances with people.
Yeah.
Against Trotsky, and then once he got Trotsky out of the way, then building alliances against the other people until he was in control. So what happens? He works with Zinoviev and Kamenev to get Trotsky out, and then he gets Kamenev and Zinoviev. So you kind of. I don't think that. I think there's no fundamental difference. I don't know. Is there a fundamental difference at this point? I think the difference is only about tactics.
They were arguing about, so in February who should be in control. In March there are arguments about differentiating their party from other parties. In April they're arguing whether, when, and how to wrest control from the liberals and other parties. That was the timeline that I had taken notes on. And then in May, I didn't keep taking notes as I was reading them. So in May and June, I don't know that Stalin is really mentioned that much. Like, it talks a lot about Lenin, I think because Lenin is gaining power at this time.
Yeah, because Lenin by this point has wrested control of the Bolshevik Party.
Yeah.
To his approach. Stalin is clever enough to see how things are turning out.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is, if those three were in a room having they wouldn't probably have it. Stalin would probably be watching the other two arguing before deciding which side he was going to come down on.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Oops. Sorry.
Because I think Stalin's, where Trotsky says that Stalin was politically blank, or whatever that phrase was, I don't think he's politically blank. I think he is a Marxist by a basic level, but he's very much more about what's gonna. Yeah, that is probably true. Any meeting in any company. But yeah,
So,
I think they agree on I think they now agree on fundamentals, but I think on basics. But I think their argument is more about tactics, and what comes next if you do seize control of, if you do boot out the provisional government.
Okay, so Stalin. Would Lenin have called Stalin a compromiser, do you think? Because he uses that term a lot, like, for the people who are in control, like when he arrived.
Probably would. Based on the version that you get from Trotsky, then he probably would have done. Maybe not to his face.
Yeah. Do you think that's it? Are you getting like a different kind of view of him from other authors, or have they not talked about him too much yet?
From what I've read over time, I think Trotsky. I think Trotsky's account is reasonably fair. Stalin isn't isn't the most key figure at this point, but then neither's Trotsky.
Right.
But
it's
they've
really
been
Lenin's show at the moment.
But Stalin has been consistently there and consistently working as a Bolshevik, and has influence, because he was I think he was working he was part of the editorial team for Pravda, or part of the group that gave direction to Pravda, to push whatever version. So he has influence and power, but I don't think I think it's easy to see him as more important than he was retrospectively. Because
it was
of what
later that he was. I feel like, because that's true. He mentions that somewhere in there, like that in these early days, nobody considered him a power player, but we know who he is because of later. So we're kind of following. Trotsky is really, he's taking care to develop everything, like a lot of details, like very slowly over time. He's building it, which is really helpful.
But also, as I said, Trotsky at this point wasn't
that important yet either. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Two parts. So Stalin, was he a landowner?
No, Stalin, I would say, of the three of them, I would
Mhm.
say Stalin is the nearest to being a work, like a. I mean, he goes to a. There's a proper name for them, but he goes to a religious college with a view to becoming a monk.
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
But then he gets distracted and becomes a revolutionary. And he's involved in a lot of crime, like bank robberies and
Wow. Oh my gosh.
those kind of things.
I've heard
Lenin
him
is
characterized as a thug, you know.
yeah. I mean, he was basically Lenin was posh. Lenin was basically a minor aristocrat.
Mm.
Trotsky is Jewish intellectual. So I mean, Stalin isn't stupid, but he isn't. I wouldn't call him an intellectual.
Okay.
Whereas Lenin and Trotsky, I would call intellectuals, which is probably why they would have lost to Stalin.
Yes. Okay, yeah. I had most of what I have down so far. So for Lenin, I had written down anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-government generally, and then anti-bourgeoisie and pro-proletariat. That's mainly what I've gotten of him so far.
Yeah. Well, when I read State and Revolution by Lenin a few years back, and his implication is that you have a revolution, you have a dictatorship of the proletariat to deal with the problems that come from the people who don't want a revolution. But eventually, as time goes by, the system works in such a way that the need for big government falls away, and that you have a much less governmental administrative thing. You have virtually some. I almost would say you have communities. You have small scale democracy, so you don't need a big government. You have local small scale democracy. But for a period of time, you need a dictatorship of the proletariat, at which the implication is going to be dealing with the enemies of the revolution.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting. Because, wasn't communism, even from the beginning, pretty, like, atheist? So, like, going from a monk to communist revolutionary, also burglar, that was quite a swing.
I don't know. I think faith... There's a Doctor Who episode. This is going to sound like a tangent, but bear with me. There's a Doctor Who episode called The Curse of Fenric, and it features sort of vampires, and they are put off by faith. Now, the faith doesn't have to be like in traditional vampire stories; it's a cross. But in the Doctor Who story, it's any faith. And there's a Russian character in it. There's a group of Russian soldiers. It's set in World War II. There's a group of Russian soldiers, and the leader of that Russian group, it has faith in the revolution, and his faith is strong enough that it forces the vampires away from him because it's faith. And actually, I think going from faith in God to having faith in a revolution is not that big a step. It's a question. It's faith. It's what you have faith in. And it might be yourself, but it's like a solid faith in something to change the world. I think partly education. It's like it's like at that period of time going into to train. I wish I could remember what the proper word for the blown places they go in are. going into one of those is probably a good way of getting educated in a place where there aren't that many schools.
True. Yeah.
So how much real intention he had of becoming a monk, I don't know.
Okay, and then so why don't we take a look at our next question here? What should we talk about next? We were talking earlier about. I wanted to talk about how accurate Trotsky's portrayal of World War I is, because you were reading the Eastern Front. Maybe that would. I knew that you know a lot more about World War I because of your remembrance reads. So I really wanted to pick your brain on this.
Well, this comes back to causes of World War One, and imperialism is definitely part of it.
Mm-hmm.
There is definitely an element of a series of great empires clash because they have vested interests all over the world, and the Germans are a bit sulky because they never got to get all the colonies abroad that the British and the French got, and they want their place in the sun, in inverted commas, which is such a terrible phrase for describing such a horrible thing as empire. So there's definitely an element of that, and it helped increase the tensions between the groups, and it also helped, in a way, it helped, like the threat of Germany or the fear of Germany put an end to centuries of Anglo-French hostility because they went into an entente with each other because of the fear of Germany. So yes, I think imperialism and markets and those kind of things are part of what happens, but there's so much else in it that I don't think you can do. I mean, I suppose the question is it essentially an imperial war? Then the answer is probably yes, but there is so much more.
There's more to it than that.
Because
that's basically seems to be what Russia thinks at the time. Like, and the soldiers are like, they want peace so badly, but maybe they also just want peace because they don't feel strong enough to fight anymore. So maybe it's not just that they disagree with the direction of the war, but they just feel like they can't keep fighting. Yeah,
I think I'm always astonished with World War One, actually with wars in general, but World War One in particular, that the soldiers on all sides didn't just call it just go, we're not going to fight anymore because we're literally 50 yards apart, 100 yards apart.
Yeah.
There's no, what are we fighting for? But there are other things, that influence why people fight than there is patriotism, there's faith, there's fear, because there's like I had a discussion about this when I was talking to somebody about World War II. Like, there's this whole thing going on during the British elections of what we should have stayed neutral in World War II or World War One, and the thing is, no British government can allow a single European power to control all the ports from the Baltic to Brittany, because it's such a threat to Britain. So we were always going to stop. Our foreign policy for hundreds of years has been to make sure that no single power has control of the continent of Europe.
Right.
It's probably still our foreign policy.
That's right.
It's probably still our foreign policy.
That makes sense.
Because so there's things like that, and there was a genuine belief that I think some people had a genuine belief that Germany was especially the way it behaved in the first part of the war was essentially a threat to democracy and a threat to the West and a threat to the Western world. How true that is, I don't know. They were definitely much more militaristic than most of the rest of the Western powers, especially the British. I mean, we notoriously had no really large standing army, no conscription.
Yeah, I mean, it's so your island is not that big, you know. where would you even?
No, we've never had conscription until 1916.
Really? Wow.
Whereas every other country in Europe had some kind of national service, effectively, and our standing army was relatively small, because they were seen. I think, and this is my theory, I think it's a hangover from the English Civil War, when having a large standing army at home was seen as a potential threat, because generals have a habit of deciding that they want to be in control.
Yeah, I know. They are the. It's dangerous to give someone that much control.
Yeah, especially with a lot of soldiers under their command.
Yeah, who, will follow them. This is so interesting. I never even thought about this, but Russia is now an empire, is currently fighting an imperialist war. So very different from the Russia in 1917.
Well, Russia was an empire in 1917. It's just that it wasn't really a foreign. It took control of Siberia.
That's true. It lost to Japan,
all the states that are now independent. All the sort of Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and all those countries. Poland, Finland, they were all part of the Russian Empire at this point. So Russia was an imperial power. It's just there's a slight tendency to forget that. Well, if you're British, there's a slight tendency to forget that. The Poles and the Finns definitely don't forget that.
Yeah. Well,
so there is.
I didn't even really think about that, but that's true. They already were an imperialist power. So was that something that the revolutionaries wanted to change, like the soldiers and workers? Did they want that to change?
That's a good question. I don't know if they did really particularly. I think they just wanted to stabilize. I mean, when they eventually signed the peace deal with the Germans, they gave up a lot of territory and a lot of. That implies that they weren't that bothered, but then they proceeded to fight a civil war, which included invading Poland. Which they didn't eventually win, but it's one of those weird things that I think British people and Americans probably as well forget, is that when you look at a map of Europe, Poland is comes and goes, is invaded, moved, over hundreds of years. It goes backwards and forwards across the map. It appears, it disappears, it gets invaded, gets cut up. It suffers more casualties in World War II as a percentage of population than any country in the world.
Wow.
And it's often, and you kind of often forget that in the story of when Russia becomes the USSR and takes over, and after World War II takes over Eastern Europe, it's only doing what the Tsar probably would have been quite happy to do. Like in the Balkans, they were always trying to get control of they're trying to get control of the Balkans because they wanted an access to the Mediterranean through Constantinople. That was always their big thing, was to get control of the Straits so they could get into the Mediterranean Sea. So it's actually quite funny. This is a petty theory. This is a pet theory of mine. If you look at the main foreign policy drivers of all European countries, I don't think they've changed in 200, 300 years for all of them. They're all roughly the same.
Interesting.
And I think, because I think they generally are, I think America, like for example, the main drivers of America's foreign policy probably hasn't changed since 1770, well, probably 1800, possibly. Because your main threats are, well, it's like protecting yourself from threats, making sure you're in control of, I suppose from the Monroe Doctrine onwards. So I think it is an imperialist war. Essentially, it is an imperialist war, but that's more because everybody fighting it is an imperial power.
Yeah. Okay. I'm now like Mimi, your question has me like going now. Now I'm like, this is so interesting because so was Lenin against Russia being like an empire? Like
Well,
if
Lenin is Sorry,
yeah. Go ahead.
I keep doing this to you. Sorry.
No, that's okay. This is a discussion.
Lenin is definitely anti-imperialist in general. He writes on it quite extensively, from what I remember. I've not really read everything he's ever written on it, but he's definitely anti-imperialist in general. But and just because somebody's anti-imperialist about other people's empires doesn't necessarily mean that you are anti your own empire. Because if he was anti-imperialist, then when the Russians when the Bolsheviks finally took control in the 1920s, in sort of after the civil war's over in like 1925, 26, then surely he would have undone the Russian Empire and given
land back.
independence to the places that wanted independence. There was some talk of, for example, of giving the Jews in Russia a state of their own within Russia.
Really? Wow.
Because they had the power, but on an equal terms. They had this thing that they had in the 19th century, which is the Pale of Settlement, which was basically the Jews are at the bottom of the nationalities list in the USSR. They're the only people. Sorry, in the Tsarist Empire, they're the only people that have a different set of rules applied to them. And they live in the Pale of Settlement. They're not allowed to own property. They're not allowed. There's loads of things they're not allowed to do. So it's one of the reasons why. In fact, one of the quotes from the Fige's book is that because there were issues with nationalities within the Russian Empire, the Russian secret police almost viewed Poles and Jews as revolutionaries just because they were Poles and Jews.
Interesting.
They took it for granted. And there is no. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish people involved in the revolution.
Yes, it was. They were talking about that the revolution was very international.
There's a very good section in that Fige's book about nationalism and how it affected Russia and how it contributed to the revolution. Because after the key point where Russia goes wrong, and I think when revolution is set in the ball rolling for the revolution is set, is the assassination of Alexander II and his son Alexander III being unwilling to compromise on the powers of the monarchy, and trying to undo some of the stuff that had been done to sort of democratize, in the loosest sense, Russia at that point. So they introduced things like, and Nicholas followed that path. So Alexander III, they introduced these rules about trying to schools. You couldn't use non-Russian. You had to use Russian in all official things in schools. So it meant like Polish people were taught in Russian in Polish, and they weren't allowed to speak Polish and all these things contributed to dissatisfaction, and it led to, and because they wouldn't compromise, there was no opportunity for anything to develop along the lines of maybe a British monarchy or a more democratic, more liberal, because the people after Alexander II's murder, effectively a counter-revolution started. But the problem with once it started is it created lots of reasons for people to hate it, for whether there were nationalist reasons, economic reasons. Peasants had different reasons to they wouldn't allow proper trade. They wouldn't allow proper trade unions. They weren't allowed. Whereas if you'd actually allowed trade unions, maybe that would have taken some of the focus onto economic issues and not onto political issues. which is kind of what happened with British trade. British trade unions are political, but their main issues have always been around economics, so about wages and conditions. So there's that. The assassination of Alexander II is when the revolution begins, in my opinion.
Yes. Okay, Alexander II. When was he?
It's Nicholas II's grandfather, so it's probably 1830.
Okay. That is so
maybe a bit later.
Now we had a couple. This was interesting. Thank you, Urza. I did not realize. So yeah, I didn't really. I think because I've grown up in modern America, I don't really think about what the priorities were in earlier history, like with foreign policy. So that's really interesting. They were still thinking about that, hundreds of years later.
So I would say, to answer this question as simply as possible, is essentially yes, but more because it's imperialist powers fighting imperialist powers. If it's like saying, but I don't think the causes are entirely down to imperialism.
Okay. He wasn't. I mean, he's not writing a history of World War I, but it was just so. It was very curious to me that anti-imperialism, ending the war, that was such a big concern for them. Like that was the main. Because the provisional government was like, that's what we're going to continue doing, and that's all they really cared about was keeping in with the Allies.
Yeah, but I suppose the other reason why. Yeah, I suppose the other reason why you could see it as an imperial power, and again, I'm sort of thinking on my feet here, is that part of the issues were that part of the smaller causes of the war are empires going into decline. So the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and the decline of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the complexities of both of those are contributory factors to the causes to why World War II broke out, because there have been issues with the Balkans for a while as the Ottoman Empire gradually fell apart, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because nationalism became a thing, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had a problem with their multiple nationalities. So there maybe, but nationalism, I think nationalism more than imperialism is possibly
the real driver.
Yeah, they're connected, but
yeah, this was true too. I used this quote on Goodreads because I thought the 3 whales. I had never heard of that before, but I didn't really understand what he meant. So that makes sense. The 3 whales holding. So the 3 whales that were holding up Bolshevism.
Yeah,
that's what he was referring to. So okay. Awesome. Well, we had other questions prepared, but I think maybe we'll just end on what are you most excited about to learn about in the future of this book?
I am quite interested to see how he describes the next couple of months, and
like July.
Yeah, because we're still 3 or 4 months away from the October Revolution, so that period before the actual main revolution, I'm intrigued to find out about the politicking and the backwards and forwards stuff and discussions around that.
Yes, because he keeps switching perspectives from like Bolshevik Party, army. I will probably end up talking more about the international perspective at some point. But yeah,
and also he's going to be referring to himself in the third person more often, I think.
Yes, that's what I'm really excited about now. Is I want to learn more about actually Trotsky. Like when he starts talking about himself, I'm very interested because I only have like a couple things down that I can tell. Like he was clearly anti-compromise and well, it seems like he was anti-bourgeoisie, but the Mensheviks weren't really. They were interested in compromise. But he's talked so much about how they should never have given over the power again, which is what the Mensheviks were okay with, that compromise. So I don't know. I'm not really sure where he stands on hardly anything.
Yeah, because he's kept himself out of it mostly.
He has. Yeah, it's like he's just some third-party observer.
Yeah.
Which at this point he somewhat is, but still. He's now in Russia, so hopefully we'll be learning about him soon.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who joined us for today's live show. Ursa and Mimi, thank you so much for your comments. Your comments are what make the live show really fun. And of course, Tony, for bringing all of his knowledge, like all of his reading. I really appreciate you doing this with me. It's a much more interesting conversation with you in it. So thank you for coming today.
Yeah, I worry, as I always do, I worry that it's more my monologue than...
No. Well, if I ask you a direct question, of course, that's what I'm hoping for, is tell us all your thoughts. So, and we do have another date set up, but I keep forgetting my planner in here. So I don't know the date offhand, but I will.
I think it's July the... Hang on, I'll tell you because I've got it in my diary. Hang on a minute.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Sunday, July the 14th at, well, the same time as this one. So 7:30 English time.
Perfect.
11:30 Eastern time.
Yeah, or 11:30 Pacific time.
Pacific.
So yeah, so I'm on the Pacific Coast. Yeah, and thank you so much, Mimi, and thank you for the date, Tony. So we'll be discussing chapters 21 through 25. So we hope you'll join us, and we'll see you in a month. Bye, everyone.
Bye.